All right, next item is items for board action. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Birdie and members of the board. I do have several items for your consideration. Under letter D, other items for board action. Number 1, the board hereby appoints Belina Shorter to serve as the delegate for the Ohio School Boards Association annual business meeting on Monday, November 8th, 2021. In the event that the delegate is unable to serve, Brian Begley has been appointed as alternate. Number 2, recommend the rescission of the following board policy, letter A. Number 3, recommend approval of the bus routes for the 2021-2022 school year. A complete set of bus routes is available for review in the Transportation Office. Number 4, recommend approval of the Business Advisory Council Memorandum of Understanding. And if it's okay with the board, I would request that you waive the reading of that MOU.
That's fine.
Okay. And number 5, recommend approval of anchor easement for Duke Energy located at Creekside Middle School. And that concludes the items that I have for your consideration this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to accept those recommendations.
So moved.
Second?
I heard Mr. Clark and Mr. Begley. Is there any questions or comments from the board?
Yes, I actually wanted to have item 2 separate in regards to the facial mask coverings. I wasn't here at the meeting that you guys had before, so I did not get a chance to speak on the policy. But if you could pull that out separately, I think that the item needs to be revised rather than rescinded.
I think we'll have an opportunity to come up with a new policy. So we could, if I'm understanding that right, and I ask legal counsel that, we could rescind this policy and then come up with a new policy to accommodate any new mandates or recommendations from the Ohio Department of Health and the Ohio Department of Education. Am I understanding that correctly?
I do not have an answer for you on that. I believe that that is correct, but I'd have to actually look into that.
And then I guess the other question would just be a point of order. We've already had a motion to accept things as listed and a second. So to take that one thing out, we'd have to vote. How could we vote that down? We'd almost have to pass it already as motioned, correct?
I believe so. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to.
So, well, I think it's important that Mr. Smith and his leadership team is monitoring everything that's going on. And they get daily updates from the local Board of Health and the State Board of Health and the ODE. And I think it's important that we keep this situation moving forward. And again, it's fluid. It's changing by the hour. I think what we're doing here is we're just going by our recommendations from ODE and OSBA. I'm sorry, just OSBA to rescind the policy that we passed last August because it's no longer mandated in Ohio. And then we can come up with a new policy at a later date to affect this coming school year. That's my understanding.
That's correct.
Okay. So I know any decision that we make on that policy is going to be very controversial. It's going to be very emotional. I think parents will then have the opportunity to come and talk about it because it'll be done at a meeting, or at least we have a meeting take place that they could have public participation. And we've been getting a lot of emails about this already, and I'm sure it's something that parents are going to have some input on. But this actually just rescinding the policy that was already in place and is no longer really valid since it's not mandated anymore in the state, then we could still come back as a board and come up with a new policy.
Right, I thought that the language could just be tweaked here, and an amendment to the policy could be made.
Okay.
Because it does state here that there is flexibility, consideration, currently available guidance from state and local health departments, with the understanding that this guidance will continue to change over time.
Okay.
So it seems that there is some flexibility built into the policy itself. Since the guidance from ODH has changed, that's a reflection that the policy is nimble. That's my understanding of it. Is that there's already flexibility built into it.
Yeah, I mean, so we do have new guidance for this year from the Ohio Department of Health. And actually today received new guidance from our Butler County General Health District. So
Right.
the guidance definitely has changed. If you know, I don't have the packet with me of the guidance that we received a few weeks ago, but it's similar to last year in that it's a lot of information, but the guidance, the content is different. If you recall, and really, honestly, the biggest difference is the masking. Last year it was mandated. This year it's strongly recommended.
Right.
Other than that, you know, we are still social distancing as much as possible. We are talking to our custodial staff about sanitizing and cleaning high-touch areas during the day, those kinds of things. And then also, a lot of the things that happened during the course of the year last year in terms of maybe classes walking to their elective class during the school day, you know, we will continue some of those processes that we put into place last year as a result of the, you know, the recent guidance
Right.
that we've received.
Right. And I understand, it's just as it pertains to students, the policy says the board directs the superintendent to work in consult. Okay. we'll do this. The board directs the superintendent to work in consultation with the local health officials to develop detailed procedures for the use of face coverings by the students that consider all available science. In drafting these procedures, the superintendent will take into consideration currently available guidance from state and local health departments with the understanding that this guidance will continue to change over time. That seems to be critical. It just says to me that there's already flexibility built into this policy. Is that not the understanding of the other board members? Seems that the flexibility is already here.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that there is flexibility built in. I think that this is a great basis for a new policy that we need to come up with to address this year. I think based on the OSB recommendations, that since it's not mandated, that we do rescind the policy and then come up with a different one. I think that was the discussion that we had last time. But I definitely understand your concerns, and I think you're right. I think a lot, that does give us flexibility. And I think it gave us flexibility during the 2020/2022 school year to do those things. And I think this is great language in there already for us to develop a new policy for the upcoming school year.
Okay. And so the new policy, I wasn't aware that we were going to move forward with the new policy, which
Well, we
is-
may or may not, but I mean, to just
Right.
give us
Right, it's-
a good basis to do that.
Right, it's not a firm yes or no, and I guess that's what I would really want to.
No, and we haven't had any discussions yet about a new policy. You did mention when you read the old policy, superintendent working with local health
Local health
officials. That is still happening.
Yes.
You know, it's been happening maybe twice a week, the last few weeks. And we, as a district, have adopted the exact language that is found in the ODH guidelines, as you know. And then just this afternoon, it was confirmed that the Butler County General Health District is now strongly recommending that all students and staff wear a mask while at school, whereas ODH was strongly recommending that unvaccinated students and staff wear a mask. So
Right.
that guidance became official from at the local level today,
Yes,
very recently.
that's right.
And so we are taking that into consideration. So now at this point, we have a state organization and a local organization that have a slight difference in their recommendation. And so we will take that into consideration. The only difference is unvaccinated versus all, and it is a recommendation and not a mandate. So we'll be discussing that matter. Actually, we have a district leadership team meeting tomorrow morning to discuss the latest guidance at the local level.
Okay.
That may not answer your ultimate question, but I wanted to respond to the piece about that is still happening,
Okay.
consultation.
Mrs. Shorter, if you don't mind if I just add one thought. There is some flexibility allowed within this policy for the superintendent, but there are areas of this policy that are not flexible. Like this
Okay.
policy states that everyone has to wear it. They're required to wear a mask unless you fall into one of 6 exceptions. So that's not flexible, and it's not what we're currently doing. So I think that was why OSBA thought that we should rescind this policy. And
Right, and, I mean, one of the suggestions I would have would be to add to one of those exceptions as persons who are vaccinated. I would add that as an exception. My concern is the kids that are under 12 who will not have the opportunity to be vaccinated. So that is why I would like to see an amendment to it rather than a whole-scale rescinding of it, unless there is a promise that we'll have a new policy.
Just as an afterthought, this is, there is so much going on when these discussions behind the scene. One of the things you just mentioned, different sets of rules for unvaccinated versus vaccinated, and that, as a school district, we're not permitted to ask who has been vaccinated and who isn't. In terms of contact tracing, the health department will be the ones who will deal with that matter. So, and again, some of this stuff is in current legislation that's being debated about whether or not, there are a lot of theories out there that a lot of school officials are trying to get clarification on. So for example, is it appropriate to require masks for one age group but not another in the same school district because you're treating students in the same district differently? There's some speculation about, well, let me get back to contact tracing. So contact tracing, if when we have a positive case, our administrators will provide a list of close contacts to the health department. The health department, we don't have that list of those who have been vaccinated, so they will go through the list and they will remove those who have been vaccinated. In addition, this is also very recent guidance that we will be putting out in the next few days from ODH. If you are wearing a facial covering, vaccinated or not, and you are a close contact, you will not be required to quarantine. That's a really big deal for families who are really concerned about having their children be placed into quarantine. So now, if my child hasn't been vaccinated, which, by the way, if you have been vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine if you've been a close contact. So now if I'm really worried about that and my child's under 12 or over 12 and didn't vaccinate or didn't have the opportunity under 12, if my child is wearing a mask, then he or she will not be a candidate for quarantine unless they
Which is huge.
test positive. But my point is, and I know I've jumped around to several different places, my main message is there are a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty about what schools can and can't do and what local health departments, can they issue a mandate, can they not? I've read it both sides. I've asked for clarification just today with our local health commissioner. So she's looking into that. About 90 minutes ago, I received an email that a local representative says that local health departments do have the authority to mandate masks in schools, but we haven't been told that information. And I'm not saying that that's accurate. My point is, it's hard to keep up with just the speculation right now in regard to masking and what can we ask those kinds of things. So it's fluid, it's changing every day, but we're on top of it. And the last point that I want to make, before turning it back over to the board, as I've returned emails, where we stand right now, again, is aligned with ODH, strong recommendations for unvaccinated to wear a mask. That could change. So we've always said we will monitor the data. And if the data tells us that COVID is spreading in our schools, then we will respond appropriately. And that appropriate response could go back to a mask mandate. If the data is telling us, hey, this is a problem, then we'll discuss it and we'll go from there. So just because we start the year with, a stance that is, strongly recommend, doesn't mean that we can't change. There is flexibility. It is all about safety and security. But right now, I know there's community data. We had summer school this summer. We had very, very few issues. I know, that did go into July. Wasn't in late July. I know this is all kind of picked up in the last couple weeks. So we are taking it one day at a time. We will pay attention to the data. There is flexibility, and that's what I'd like for not just the board to know, but the entire community. So that's where we are today. And I probably shared more information than what you asked about, but
No,
I felt like all of those things are valid.
Yeah, that's important, and I appreciate the candid conversation. This is very important. I worry tremendously about those kids that are not vaccinated. I definitely do. With the numbers that have just come in, that's my concern. Things are not moving in the right direction, and I want to make sure that we are not tying our hands. If we don't start off the year with a policy like this, does it become difficult for us to move into that if needed?
No,
I can assure you that's not the case.
No.
Okay.
And I won't hesitate to do what's right based on what the data is telling us.
Okay. And I trust that, Mr. Smith.
I appreciate that.
I just know it's a difficult political issue as well as a public health issue, and it becomes very mired in all of that, but the kids are so important. So, I just want to make sure that we are in a place that gives us flexibility so that we can do what we need to do for public health and balancing those things. Yeah.
And this time last year, I'm sorry, Mr. Vega, but like this time last year, things were changing so quickly on us. If you remember, we were going to have a meeting to say, we're going to be open full-time, and then the next day, it was like, well, we're going to have to be 100% virtual. And then a couple of days later, it's like, well, now we can do a hybrid. I mean, it was just, and I think that's what's going on here, is that everything is just so fluid. We're getting different information from different people, different health professionals have different opinions. And I think Mr. Smith and his leadership team are involved in those conversations. I'm not involved in those conversations right now. I mean, I'm hearing what he's reporting to me. But I trust Mr. Smith and his leadership team to keep us abreast of what's going on. And I think we can react, and he can react appropriately if we need to the next day. Like, if something happens, he can say, starting Thursday, masks are mandated, if that's the issue that's going on. So I don't think rescinding this policy is handcuffing Mr. Smith. I think if anything, it gives him a little bit more flexibility to handle the situations as they occur, in my opinion.
I mean, would we have to have an emergency meeting to get something approved as far as a new policy, or do you feel that's not needed?
No, I think we may. I did speak with Mr. Clemens late this afternoon.
Okay.
And he does believe that if we move to a mask mandate, that would require board approval.
Yes.
So, yes. And honestly, that policy may look completely different than that policy. because that policy came from OSBA, and I don't know that OSBA is going to distribute, a mask mandating policy. I don't know, Mr. Martin, have you heard anything about that?
Nothing at this point.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bagley, I cut you off before.
Right, right. So my thoughts are, school starts on August 17th, and while that feels like it's right around the corner, it's a lifetime away in terms of the changes and the fluid situation that we're dealing with COVID, as you alluded to last year, and I'm sure will continue to be the case leading up to that day. So short of a governmental mandate, which we don't think is going to come out, it's going to be in our hands to make this decision. And I very much appreciate what you're saying in terms of our data, right? We'll be tracking that. And as soon as it becomes an issue, then that would be something we'd have to immediately address, and we would. And to your point, we'd have an emergency meeting, 7:30 in the morning, or whatever we'd have to do to make that possible. I don't have a better answer than that as it stands right now. I think this is last year's policy, and that's why OSB and the administration is asking us to address it, and I think that's all this is, cleaning up that matter from last year. We move forward in this fluid situation and do the best we can as we get closer to the start of school.
Yeah, okay, well, those are my concerns. I know that parents are really concerned out there, as they should be. I just hope that the public understands that we are going to have to be flexible. I just have the feeling, that this may send a hardcore message to some parents, and that is not always a good thing when you're trying to have flexibility. So
The
that's
website
a
reflects
concern.
Yeah, and I would encourage, so I've answered a few emails on this matter, and so I would encourage anyone that sees what's happening this evening in that way, I would encourage them to go back to the previous board meeting. And I've had some conversations with some folks that have emailed me and said, listen, this process happens with every item for board action. It was discussed at the last meeting, and then if they watch that and then they watch tonight's meeting and they listen to the conversation, I think this conversation would set their minds at ease. It would help, because they would see that this is not about, we can't wait to get rid of this policy. It's simply a process. And that then they could hear us say, hey, we're going to monitor the data. We won't hesitate. If the data is painting a picture that needs to be addressed, we won't hesitate to do so. And so, we talked about trusting each other, and it's important that they have to trust us. And, as we go back the last 16 months, this district has been very transparent about what is happening, to the point, communicating with our families and our school community about, we will be discussing this on this date. We don't try to sneak things into agendas or things like that. We're very upfront, very honest. This was an item for board discussion. It was on for board action. It wasn't added to the agenda late. None of those kinds of things. And so, one at a time, we have to reassure those people that, hey, this is just a process. Go back and watch the other meeting. You can listen to the discussion. Watch this one. This discussion is great for our community to listen, to see, and to hear. Because they get a sense from every board member that, hey, we're going to watch the data, and we'll respond appropriately.
Yes, and you're right. I hope that people will follow the actual discussion, but you know how things are, so.
I do. I do.
Yeah.
It's right there on the website as well.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. That is,
Mr. Clark?
that's good.
Yeah, since you
information.
said all the board members, I guess I better say something. No, I think you're right, and what you said, Mr. Smith, we're not saying we got to pass this policy and get it through. It's not like that. It is a process. It's on the agenda. at last meeting and then this meeting. So it is a stepping stone process. We're not trying to hide anything from anybody. It's being very clear, very transparent. And I would agree, I would encourage the public to go to the website, dig a little bit, don't just look on the surface and see that, peel back that onion, so to speak, and read previous comments, watch the previous board meetings. What's just on top isn't the full message. There's steps to get there. And I think it's important that the public, the community, parents do that. Do some homework, to before you email the board or get a community together to come in and speak or whatever it is that you want to do, which you're free to do. But I think it's safe to say that we all have the safety of the students, the parents and families in our community at our heart, and that's our passion. That's why we're all here. So I think your comment is welcomed, obviously, and it's safe to say that we're all about the same focus.
Thanks, Scott, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Any other comments or questions about this policy or all these recommendations? Okay, Mrs. Lane, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Begley?
Yes.
Mr. Birding?
Yes.
Mrs. Shorter?
Yes.
Motion passes.